Forbidden Jutsus. It's this entire category of techniques in the Naruto series that are supposed to be forbidden. I mean, it's in the name, but then again, a lot of people simply use Forbidden Jutsus as if it's not a big deal, which is certainly counterintuitive. If the jutsu is forbidden, why are people using the jutsus as though, like, there's no importance in using jutsus like that? For example, two of Naruto's most used jutsus in the entire series, two iconic abilities of the main character, are forbidden jutsus. The Shadow Clone Jutsu, the literal bread and butter of Naruto when it comes to fights, because he uses that technique in every single fight he participates ever since chapter 1, and also the Rasenshuriken is another forbidden technique. And it's not as though Naruto is trying to hide his usage of the Shadow Clone Jutsu and the Rasenshuriken. I mean, not at all. He's always using those two jutsus, especially the Shadow Clone Jutsu. So why are they considered forbidden, and does a forbidden jutsu literally mean that the jutsu is forbidden, or is it just a different classification of some sort? Well, to explore that, we have to dive a little bit deep into the lore of forbidden jutsus, or kinjutsu. The classification of forbidden jutsus first came during the Warring States periods, when the newly formed hidden villages agreed to forbid certain types of techniques. Now, because the shinobi system was so new after the entire period of war and destruction between clans, the villages wanted to keep the violence down and diminish the deaths and the bloodshed that would happen in the battlefield. So certain techniques that are unethical or too deadly were simply banned, quote unquote, from being used and taught in the hidden villages. And then you may say, well, if you're banning things from war, why don't you ban everything? Because it's a war, right? You gotta do what you gotta do to win. But actually no, because this also exists in real life. The Geneva Convention stipulates what can and cannot be done during war, and there are war crimes that can actually be persecuted after the war is done. The same thing applies for several techniques in the Naruto world. One of those techniques that is completely unethical and immoral to use is the Edo Tensei, which brings back people from the dead, and you simply use their corpses as zombies to fight against enemies on the battlefield, meaning that you can actually put them against people that they loved when they were alive. We see this happening a lot during the war arc itself. So obviously the Edo Tensei is a forbidden jutsu for all the immoral implications that using the jutsu has. It's not only that you're bringing somebody back from the dead and using it as a puppet, you're also killing somebody as a sacrifice to use the Edo Tensei jutsu for each person you bring back. So yes, techniques like that were banned by the 5 villages, but it's not as though they got rid of those abilities entirely. They just stopped openly teaching those abilities, but they still had access to them and the ability to learn them if necessary. For instance, the Shadow Clone Jutsu was classified as a forbidden technique, but the instructions to master the Shadow Clone Jutsu were detailed inside a scroll that Naruto stole in chapter 1 per Mizuki's request, telling Naruto that he should be a ninja and all that. Mizuki manipulated Naruto, but Naruto actually came around. But you could see in chapter 1 how important that scroll was, because the 3rd Hokage sent a lot of ninjas after Naruto, Mizuki, and Iruka in that situation, because Naruto got the scroll of the Shadow Clone Jutsu. It's very important. It's a dangerous technique. We have to get the scroll back. Other notable situations of forbidden jutsus being stolen from the village were Kakuzu stealing the prized Earth Grudge Fear, which is a forbidden jutsu of the Waterfall village, and Dater stealing the forbidden jutsu that allowed him to use clay to mold his explosives from the Stone Village. But you can see here that the definition of a forbidden jutsu evolved from when they were first instituted back in the day when the 5 villages were just formed. Because if you think about it for a second, the Shadow Clone Jutsu, for example, is not exactly an unethical technique that's going to wreak havoc in the battlefield and cause horrific deaths. Because if that's the case, then the Fireball Jutsu would have to be a forbidden technique as well, because it burns people and this is bad. No, the definition for forbidden jutsu also began to encompass jutsus that are dangerous for the user himself. So now in the Naruto universe, a forbidden jutsu can be a jutsu that's dangerous for the user, a jutsu that's too unethical, or both things at the same time. And these jutsus that can be very dangerous for the user are classified as forbidden, so that not everybody has access to them and eventually hurt themselves trying to learn or use a technique that can be very harmful for the user. So the hidden villages ninjas, when they have jutsus like that are dangerous for the user, only allow certain specific ninjas that are powerful and experienced to learn the jutsu. Ninjas that they know will not put themselves in too much danger when using the technique. This is the classic Shadow Clone Jutsu example. It may be the staple technique of the main character, but what most people don't realize is that the Shadow Clone Jutsu is an extremely dangerous jutsu. Because the user has to split the chakra equally to every single clone, it's very easy to deplete your chakra very fast when using the Shadow Clone Jutsu, and if you do that, you can die. Obviously, Naruto is an exception here because he has an absurd amount of chakra, which allows him to spam the Shadow Clone Jutsu, but bear in mind that the Shadow Clone Jutsu was never meant to be used the way Naruto uses them. You're not supposed to create armies of Shadow Clones and bomb rush your opponents with them. The Shadow Clone Jutsu was primarily created to gather intel. Send in a Shadow Clone to collect the information you need. If the clone dies, it's okay because it's a clone, and when the clone is destroyed, you get the information from the clone. It's a perfect intel gathering jutsu. Now later in Naruto Shippuden, Kakashi exploits this peculiar aspect of the Shadow Clone Jutsu to make Naruto's Rasenshuriken training advance much faster, because Naruto uses an army of Shadow Clones to train, and then he gets many more hours of training at the same time for each Shadow Clone he's using, and then when he dispels the Shadow Clones, the original gains all the knowledge they collected. But as I mentioned before, Naruto's an exception. You're not supposed to use the Shadow Clone Jutsu like that. Another primary function of the Shadow Clone Jutsu was to be used as a decoy during fights. You don't want to send yourself in a particularly dangerous situation before you access everything that's possible. You want to send a Shadow Clone, because if the clone dies, it's okay, it's a clone. Kakashi does that a lot throughout the series. He uses Shadow Clones or even lightning style Shadow Clones to make sure he knows what he's dealing with before he goes in himself. And yes, the Shadow Clones can also be used during battle to help the original fight against the opponent, but it was supposed to be what, 1, 2, maybe 3 clones to help you out in the fight, not a bazillion like Naruto can create from chapter 1. I mean, Tobirama Senju in the war could only create 2 Shadow Clones, and yes, he was maintaining the 4 Crimson Ray formation, and therefore he couldn't create as many clones as he wanted to, but still, only 2, like, it's not that much. You can clearly see Naruto is not the norm here. Kiba in the war arc, he developed a better version of his multi-headed hound jutsu with 3 heads now, and he used 1 Shadow Clone to create the extra head. So Kiba is a guy that's a chunin, pretty, you know, decent ranking and all that. He can only create 1 Shadow Clone. He was probably granted access to the scroll after pleading with Tsunade to develop a better form of his Inuzuka Jutsu. But you can clearly see he doesn't spam Shadow Clones like Naruto does. Nobody really does that. Only Madara and Hashirama can do that with wood clones, and they're also chakra beasts, so they are exceptions as well. But it's not just the Shadow Clone Jutsu that's classified as a forbidden jutsu because it's dangerous for the user. There are several. Tsunade's Mitotic Regeneration, for instance, it shortens her lifespan because the cells regenerate quickly, but because they can only regenerate a set amount of times during her lifetime, well, she's not gonna live as long. So it is dangerous for the user. The Twin Snake's Mutual Death that Anko tries to use against Orochimaru, which is a jutsu that kills the user and the target at the same time, is also forbidden because it kills the user. Chiyo's life transferring ability is also a forbidden jutsu because it literally trades your life force to give somebody else, which can kill you, which happens to Chiyo in the story. The 8 gates are technically not a jutsu, but they're also classified as forbidden techniques because evidently they deal a lot of damage to the user's body. The more gates you use, the more damage you take, and if you reach the 8th gate, you die, unless Naruto comes in and saves you, like he did to Gaia, which is annoying, but it happened. And just because these techniques are classified as forbidden, it doesn't mean that whenever a person uses them, they're gonna get arrested, or they're gonna get a severe fine, or some sort of consequence. They are dangerous for you, so you are taking the risk. It's different from a forbidden technique that's forbidden because of ethical reasons, like the Edo Tensei. Yes, if somebody is using the Edo Tensei, there's a high chance people are gonna come after you because this is not something okay. Even though Tobirama was the one who invented the technique, we don't know the extent that Tobirama even used the Edo Tensei. He definitely did back in the day in the battlefield because a lot of people mentioned Tobirama using the Edo Tensei, like Ginkaku and Kinkaku for instance, but let's just say he wasn't very well liked for doing so. Then again, when we go back to the Shadow Clone Clone Jutsu example, Naruto uses that practically every chapter, and he's not arrested by the Konoha police for doing so. As a matter of fact, he is promoted to ninja for learning the jutsu, because if you learn a forbidden technique, you essentially become a ninja. You qualify to turn into a shinobi, something that Naruto didn't qualify before he learned the Shadow Clone Jutsu. And yes, the method he used to learn the Shadow Clone Jutsu was technically against the Leaf Village's law, because he stole the scroll. But now that Naruto already has access to the Shadow Clone Jutsu, you might as well let him use the jutsu, right? And the same thing applies to every single person that has access to a jutsu that can be harmful to oneself. Another example is the Rasenshuriken, which was also classified as a forbidden jutsu. First, because the type of damage it dealt to the target was so massive and so dangerous that it could even be classified as immoral to use that against living targets, but Naruto was fighting the Akatsuki in that point of the story. Nobody would complain that the Akatsuki were killed so unfairly with 1 billion wind-style needles to their bodies. But the way the jutsu deals damage is something to bear in mind, because it's certainly not normal. But then there's also the problem that the Rasenshuriken caused damage to Naruto himself. Now granted, this was before Naruto finished learning the jutsu, before he could toss the Rasenshuriken, so he had to use it like a normal Rasengan, essentially coming close to the target and hitting the target in melee, shoving the Rasenshuriken into the target's face, which he does against Kakuzu. But the problem is that the Rasenshuriken doesn't only damage Kakuzu in that situation, it also damaged Naruto's wrist, which could eventually lead him to lose his capacity of molding chakra with that hand, because the Rasenshuriken targeted the chakra network specifically, which is dangerous. Naruto didn't want to lose his chakra capabilities, right? So the jutsu was classified as a forbidden technique, and that didn't stop Naruto from using it, and nobody really reprimanded Naruto from using the Rasenshuriken against Pain or in the war arc. Being a forbidden jutsu is more like, hey, you better be careful with using this jutsu. Think well before doing so, because it can be really dangerous and the repercussions can be massive as well. But if you have to use the jutsu to save somebody that you love, or to save the village, protect the village and whatnot, go ahead and do it. Just be careful and mindful when you do so. There are also forbidden jutsu varieties that are tied to specific clans. For example, Izanagi and Izanami are forbidden jutsus of the Uchiha clan because, well, they destroy an eye when you do so, and they're extremely powerful. Using their powers can be something quite dangerous and even unethical from a certain point of view. The forehead sealing jutsu of the Hyuga clan is another forbidden jutsu as well. And these jutsus are tied to the Kekkei Genkai, so it's not as though a lot of people would be able to learn even if they wanted to, but they are given the forbidden classification because they are dangerous one way or another, or unethical. The Reaper Death Seal is another jutsu tied to a specific clan, the Uzumaki clan, that's a forbidden jutsu, but unlike Izanagi and Izanami, this is not a Kekkei Genkai. It's a forbidden jutsu of the clan, a specific jutsu developed by the Uzumaki, but other people can also learn the technique, so much so that Minato and Hiruzen both use the jutsu, and they both die when doing so in the series. So obviously, because this jutsu is both unethical, you're sealing somebody else's soul into the belly of the god of death for eternity, unless somebody releases it later like Orochimaru does to the first 4 Kage, condemning the soul to an eternity of torture, pain, and suffering, meaning that, yeah, this jutsu is messed up, you think about it. And you also give your life in exchange for the power of the god of death. So it's not only unethical, but it's extremely dangerous to you. It kills you. It fulfilled the 2 qualifications for a forbidden jutsu. I mean, you can see it's obviously a jutsu that's dangerous and should be forbidden. It's not a lot of people that are gonna have access to even learn this jutsu whatsoever. We don't know if there's a Reaper Death Seal scroll lying around, but we can infer that Minato learned that jutsu from Kushina because she was an Uzumaki, and Kushina probably learned that from Mito, and then Hiruzen must have learned it from somebody else. Maybe even when he was younger, he could have learned from the original Uzumakis that lived in the land of whirlpools. Or they just have a scroll detailing how to summon the Reaper into the world, and it's very safely stored somewhere in the Leaf Village. Let me know what's your favorite forbidden jutsu in the series. Also, watch this other video right here for more cool Naruto content. Trust me, it's a really good one. Subscribe if you haven't done so already, and like the video to help me out with the YouTube algorithm. Please, it really helps. Thank you so much for watching, guys.